with Michael Williams.
Good morning and welcome to the Point. It is one of the more interesting state House races featuring a former House Speaker against a one-term state legislator. They are Tom Gustafson, a Democrat who served as Florida House Speaker from 1988 to 1990, and Bill Hager, elected to the State House 2 years ago. Before that, served on the Boca Raton City Council. They're in the race for District 89, which will run along the coast from Boca Raton to Singer Island. Gentlemen, we thank you both for taking time to come in and be with us on To the Point. We're going to begin by allowing you a chance to spend a minute to a minute 15 tops. Just introduce yourself biographically to our viewers, not only in your new district, but throughout the Palm Beaches and Treasure Coast, simply by alphabetical order. Mr. Gustafson, please.
Thank you. My name is Tom Gustafson. I am running for the House District 89. It is a new district. New reapportionment means that all the old districts went away and new districts got created. This one is made up of parts and pieces of 5 different districts. Now, I've been living in South Florida for the last 62 years, much of that time in Fort Lauderdale, the last 10 years in Palm Beach County, living in Wellington. My candidacy was quite unexpected. A previous candidate for the seat had illness in the family, had to withdraw. I was asked to... Pamela Goodman. I was asked to get into the campaign. With my wife's permission, I did. So we've been running hard in what is a very, very short campaign. What I think I bring to the race is 14 years of experience in the Florida legislature. I was chairman of 4 different committees, majority whip in my 2nd term. I was speaker my last term. I am incurably bipartisan. I intend to run in the center and help grow the economy.
We will talk more about the specifics and the issues in just a moment, but Bill Hager, thank you for being with us this day in the state legislature now since 2010. Might also add, you came here from Iowa, your native Iowa, correct, to run NCCI, a 900-employee nonprofit group that, among other things, collected worker compensation, employee injury stats. You made insurance recommendations to various state governments, including ours in Florida. Jump off with the rest of your bio for our viewers.
Michael, great to be here. Great to be here with your listeners. My name is Bill Hager. I currently hold the position of elected member of the Florida House, House District 87. 70% of that district includes the district that we're now talking about, which is House District 89. So I lived in this district for 22 years. The district now includes Palm Beach and Singer Island up from Boca Raton. And the work I've done in this district, 7 years on the City Council of Boca Raton, intensely involved in that city, a large employer with some 900 employees in the district, meeting a payroll day in and day out. And I've worked hard along with my daughters in terms of charity, United Way, American Cancer Society, fundraising for the American Heart Association, Florida Atlantic University College of Business, member of the Executive Advisory Committee. So elated to be in the district, elated to participate on a go-forward basis. I stand on my record. My record in the Florida legislature to date is one of jobs, 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 job creation.
Let's jump off there. The Republican versus the Democrat here. Job creation, and you have different views about jobs and what to do in terms of our taxes to help spur jobs. Talk about those differences, and since you jumped off on that point, Mr. Hager, where do you differ with your opponent on how to spur job growth in the state of Florida?
Well, I differ profoundly from my opponent. My opponent, when he was a member of the Florida House, put in place tax increases, and those tax increases have names. They're called sales tax. He increased the sales tax. He was an advocate and voted for a unitary tax. He wanted to put in place a service tax on all professionals. My view is just the opposite. In a time of recession, we balance the budget in the state of Florida, and importantly, Michael, cut taxes, and specifically cut business taxes, because we know the economic formula, and the formula is pretty simple, and that is, in tough times, the right approach is to clear the decks, let the private sector create jobs. They can create jobs with respect to a government that is the least intrusive. We've taken down 4,100 regulations that choke business. As you just heard me say, we cut the business taxes in half in this state. In addition, because we fear these mid-level bureaucrats, we also put a backstop with respect to incoming regulation. And that backstop provides that any regulation producing a cost of more than $1 million must come to the legislature. So that is me. versus my opponent.
Well, let's hear from your opponent, Mr. Gustafson. I see you taking copious notes. Your thought about job creation and the criticisms that have been leveled at you about taxes that your opponent says you were in support of. Your thoughts?
Well, I was in the legislature 22 years ago. And in my last year as Speaker, we did pass a gas tax. That gas tax has been constructing our transportation system in the state of Florida for 22 years. And the reason we have a transportation system that does work, at least as well as it does, is because we properly funded it. Now, that tax went into effect when we weren't in a recession. So one of the things that Bill and I do agree upon is you don't do taxes in a recession. That's not something that's on the table. What you do try...
Although we might add again, we all talk recession. We are not technically in recession right now, but continue.
Times are tough. So the better approach is to look for infrastructure improvements you can do that would help us grow out of the recession. Now, I don't disagree with Bill at all on minimizing regulations. I don't disagree with Bill at all about having the economy be the central focus of the debate. What I will tell you is for the last 2 years, it wasn't. There were social issues, other issues that took the eye off the ball of this legislature, and they need to get back into the center, push forward, and grow the economy. I don't think they're prepared to do it. I think they're going to continue talking about anything else but the hard job of growing the economy and building an infrastructure that's both resilient and built to last.
Bottom line, job creation, you feel more business tax cuts. You feel, Mr. Gustafson, the best way to produce those jobs is an approach that minimizes taxes, but...
Well, it doesn't change the tax load. You move forward by trying to finance an infrastructure system that'll compete in the 22nd century.
We'll talk more about transportation in a moment. Let me move to a topic, and we want to come back to everything from insurance to transportation, which I know for you, Mr. Gustafson, was very important in your tenure in the legislature. But let's talk about taxes for a moment and the real-world impact. During your tenure, you voted, correct, for the $1.3 billion in cuts to education last year. This year, the governor turned around with GOP support, so let's put $1 billion back. Is that the way to grow an economy long-term when you're cutting education and saying that our view on taxes is such that we're not going to look at closing loopholes, we'd rather cut education $1.3 billion your first year as a legislator in Tallahassee, then the next year turn around and add $1 billion back? Well, talk about those real-world impacts, Mr. Hager.
Great, I'd like to. Let's talk about our schools. Let's talk about our educational system. The public schools in Florida, K through 12, ranked 11th in the United States, and that's up from 35th in 1995 before pre-Governor Jeb Bush. The state has done well in terms of walking its schools, its public schools forward. Palm Beach County, let's look at the numbers. A bachelor's degree, average salary, Palm Beach County School, $45,000. Master's degree, $50,000. With a master's degree in the school district, you can achieve a salary up to $75,000. I heard Superintendent Gent speak to a business group within the last month, and he was proud of the performance of Palm Beach County schools, with 60% of those schools ranked A, 20% of the schools ranked B.
Do you think schools can do more with less?
Here's what I believe. What I believe is the schools are managed, governed, day in and day out, at the local level, in connection with the funding on a per capita basis. Let's take a look at those numbers. 2005. Per capita funding, $6,150. 2012, most recent year, $6,400. Now, it's true that when times were good and we had an oversupply, if you will, of money, we focused that on the schools. And when times were rougher, we asked everybody to step back a bit. The $1 billion cut, let's stay with the arithmetic, because this is second-grade arithmetic. The total funding K through 12 is $20 billion. A $1 billion cut is a 5% reduction. A 5% reduction would be a family with $50,000 annual income. 5% income reduction would mean their income would drop to $47,500. Is that disastrous? No. Does that mean they stop buying food? No. So the suggestion of calamity simply doesn't stack up against the numbers or reality, Michael.
Mr. Gustafson, had you been sitting there 2 years ago, this year, what would you have done with those education cuts?
I would have spent some time with the Speaker. I would explain to him that if you want to grow the economy, you don't shortchange children.
Would you have voted for or against the cuts?
Would have voted against the cuts. Now, what's important to know is there's some politics going on here. They cut $1.4 million year, 2 years ago, and then they add $1 billion this year.
But your opponent points out student scores, generally, broadly speaking, are doing better year over year. There's some arguments, and there's certainly pockets, and it's complicated. So how do you make the argument? A lot of Republicans argue you can't quantify dollars spent necessarily with performance in the classroom, and that the U.S. overall, not just Florida, spends more on students than many countries, but doesn't get it back in performance. So how do you counter the argument of your opponent?
22 years ago, we were a lot better off in education. Everybody knows it. There is nobody, no parent, who believes that our school system is adequate. Mr. Hager and the other members of the legislature think they're just doing a fine job, cutting Bright Futures, adding 15% increase in student tuition, cutting the overall spending as if it won't affect it, and it will. Now, everybody's all tied up in reforming education, trying to get your eye off the ball that they're not funding it.
In tough times, as you both have described, what you have done to avoid these cuts the last few years with a state that was in or struggling to come out of recession, sir?
We would have found other places to cut, and we would have found places to grow the economy. Now, the way you grow the economy is you spend money on infrastructure, whether it be education, research, or transportation. Now, we haven't been talking about growing the economy. We've been talking about cutting back because it's as if the legislature has no role in growing the economy. Now, if you take the opinion the legislature can do nothing on the economy, well, then I think you need to send Bill Hager home. Because I believe you can do something about the economy. It's very clear. The economists are very clear. You spend it on infrastructure, you grow the economy for future years.
Respond to that comment, and then we'll turn to infrastructure.
Well, if anybody ought to go home vis-a-vis the record, I believe it's Speaker Gustafson.
Now, how do you make that argument when he hasn't been a state legislator for 2 decades?
Well, therein lies some of the truth. What we have with Mr. Gustafson is we have a tax...
And feel free to respond to each other.
Tax individual. He's shown himself to be a record of tax. His solution to whatever comes up is to put a greater burden on the people, on the hard-working people of this state. Let me respond, Michael. My response is let's clear the decks. Let's get strangling government out of the way. And here are the numbers. State of Texas, no property, no personal income tax, no business tax created in the last decade, 1/4 of the jobs in the U.S. There is a march in this nation.
There is some debate about the caliber of those jobs.
Well, as there always will. There's a march in this country, and the march is from the heavily unionized states, the heavily taxed states, to the non-tax states, to the right-to-work state. And as Florida continues to take down its tax, we're going to continue to grow this economy.
If next year we had to cut the budget in education again to make ends meet, would you do it?
You know what I'd do? I'd look as I did in the prior 2 years. First of all, I'd accept my constitutional responsibility, which is to balance the budget. The law of this state says that we cannot spend $1 more than comes in the front door.
So it doesn't say anything about how you prioritize that.
And you're right.
It does, actually. The Constitution says that education is a priority of the state. Bill doesn't think so. The problem is he's reading the parts of the Constitution he likes and not the parts he doesn't like. Number two,
yes, sir.
Since he continued, he doesn't live in the district until last year when he moved into it. He has said first that he's lived in the district for 22 years. He's lived in Boca Raton for 36 years.
Did you recently rent a house in Lake Clifton?
I absolutely did. I am and I admit to it. The difference is that in Bill's case, he lived outside of the district for 20 years and moved into the district, House District 89, in the last year.
What would you say to people who thought both of you, respectfully, were carpetbaggers politically speaking?
I would answer that question with the following. I've lived my whole life in South Florida. My whole life has been coastal South Florida. I moved 10 years ago to Palm Beach, and I believe I can do a good job representing this district. I also believe that Bill has a hard time sticking to the facts, which is he didn't live in the district, and number two, he does vote for an invasion of a woman's privacy in terms of her ability to control reproductivity.
We're going to come to social issues in our next segment, so we will have plenty of opportunity to speak to that. We'll give you a closing comment in this segment, first on residency, anything else you heard, and we will be coming back to transportation, social issues, and insurance for our next segment. But close this one out, Mr. Hager.
Sure. Mr. Speaker, you can have your home in Wellington. Mr. Speaker, you can have your services to the state a quarter century ago. What you can't have, Mr. Speaker, is you can't have your facts. The facts are that the public schools in this state prior to Jeb Bush and the great work that he did and subsequent were disasters. They were graded consistently in the lower quartile. Today, they're in the top 11 of the United States. So it is simply inconsistent with the facts. Now, on this district issue, 22 years in House District 87, combined into House District 89, my marital home was a stone's throw from District 89. Not only that, I've been in this district, and I challenge the Speaker to talk about charitable work he's done in the district, service he's done in the district. I've served, I've represented this district. This is my 5th run for election in this district.
Our Republican, our Democrat here. More in a moment on transportation infrastructure issues, social issues, citizens' property insurance, a big concern for a great many. We'll have you talk about all of that, and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. We're talking with Republican Bill Hager, a Florida legislator right now, and Democrat Tom Gustafson, the House Speaker. 2 decades ago, the candidates for State House in District 89, which will run along the coast from Boca Raton to Singer Island. Gentlemen, we'll begin partly where we left off. We'll want to talk infrastructure, insurance, but social issues you touched on, so I'm going to give you a chance to respond first, Mr. Hager. There was an article that pointed out that when you were elected, you were part of an effort to vote for a controversial pregnancy ultrasound bill. It was hotly contested legislation, required a woman, as I quote from the Palm Beach Post report on this, that required women to get ultrasounds before they had abortions. You also have agreed to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year that would restrict public funding of abortions and give opponents new tools to fight legalized abortion in court, as the story is reported. Also notes, it says, quote unquote, you told one group that you forgot voting for the ultrasound bill. You've heard your opponent's criticism. Your response about your stance on these issues?
Well, let's begin with the facts. Let's begin with the ultrasound bill. And the fact is I did vote for the ultrasound bill. And let's get down to what the ultrasound bill says. First of all, a ultrasound is provided for and taken with respect to every potential abortion. So an ultrasound is taken, it exists. The particular bill that passed, that I voted for, does 2 things. It permits the recipient to waive the view or see the view. That is to say, information. That's simply the bill. There's no prohibition to abortion. There's no restriction on abortion. It is a straightforward process. And let's talk about the second issue. You know, I believe in democracy. I grew up in the prairie. I grew up in a small town in Iowa. I grew up in a place among the 2nd and 3rd generation of homesteaders for whom the land and the country and the schools were truly about democracy, and people that took the civics lessons of life and of government seriously. I believe anytime a controversial issue of magnitude can be put before the voters, it ought to be.
Some argue there was an editorial today that suggested that's lawmakers who don't want to sit on the hot seat and make those tough choices themselves. Not speaking just to this issue, I might add. Your response to that?
Well, and let me continue. What this bill does, what I voted for, is to prevent the public to vote as to how public monies in an agreeable instance of controversy, in fact, want their dollars allocated.
Mr. Gustafson?
That is my response.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gustafson?
The bill is not as simply stated as Bill would suggest. There are ultrasounds that are taken as part of a decision to have an abortion, particularly with early pregnancies. The way it's done is transvaginally. Now, this took it from a medical discussion with a patient and a doctor to a government mandate to invade a woman's privacy because she chose not to have a child. In addition, she does have a right to be told that there is this image and she can look at it if she wants. And then whether or not she doesn't want to look at it or not, she will get handed to her written material that will tell her what the various stages of fetal growth are in hopes to change her mind, quite frankly. So this is a bill that invades an area of privacy that heretofore has not been invaded and changes a medical decision into a government mandate.
And what about the constitutional amendment that voters will look at this fall that would restrict public funding of abortions? Why should the public pay? There's a federal prohibition on this, Mr. Gustafson. Why should the public pay any tax dollars for abortions?
Bill takes the position that this was such an important issue that the public had to have a chance to vote on it. I find it interesting when this legislature puts 11 issues on the ballot, which quite frankly most people aren't going to understand all of them as you get through all the language that is there. And I believe it's an effort to confuse the public. That many amendments on the ballot by this legislature will confuse the public. You will not get a fair hearing on any one of those 11 because of the confusion.
But to my question, why would you support public funding of abortions? There's a federal prohibition there. You support abortion rights. Why do you support public funding therein?
Well, I haven't said I did yet.
Do you?
I believe the federal government has spoken to the issue.
But do you support it?
And I believe that if a woman wishes to have an abortion, regardless of her income, she ought to be able to elect that choice. If that means public financing, so be it.
Sir?
You know, unlike my opponent, I'm not afraid of the public. I'm not afraid of a democracy. I'm not afraid of people going to the polls and making decisions. I have imminent confidence in the American people, the people of Florida, the people of my district, in terms of their ability to decipher the ballot and to make decisions. You know,
so your critics would argue that therefore you should respect a woman's right to choose.
Let me finish, if I can, Michael. Now, let me finish, and I'll get to your point. You know, my opponent was quoted when he was Speaker of the House that he had no intention of doing the public business in public. Direct quote, bona fide quote. And I'm on the opposite end of that continuum. I'm happy to do the public's business in public. I'm happy to bring major issues before the public and let them vote. I have no fear of the public or democracy.
But simply extending the logic you just put out, if you have no fear of that and want to allow the public to make these choices, why would that not extend to a woman's private choice to choose?
And if you're talking about the ultrasound bill, back to the ultrasound bill, as I made clear, it is a right within the bill. First of all, the ultrasound is taken, and the individual has a right to either view it or hold it, Speaker. I've shown respect for you throughout this process. I'd ask the same, and the rest of that sentence simply is the individual has a right to waive or to view. And let me get to my view.
Let's wrap on this comment, because I do want to move to citizens' property insurance as well. Let's move along, because there's not going to be agreement here today, but we appreciate you at least putting out your views. Let's talk about citizens' property insurance. I don't need to tell you, so many people are groaning under the weight of A, the cost of it, B, citizens of late have said let's dump policies to reduce our exposure. Talk about your views, how they are alike and how they differ on how to, quote, fix citizens' property, but more importantly for our viewers who are watching to say, I can no longer afford to pay these bills. What are you going to do for their pocketbooks specifically? And you had the last comment on the other topic. We'll begin with you, sir. Mr. Gustafson.
There are two ways to reduce and stabilize insurance rates. One is you spread the risk, and two, you build resilient infrastructure in communities that are built to last. Now, right now, Bill and I totally disagree on how to come to grips with this problem. Citizens was set up because the out-of-state carriers left us after Andrew and left us after a flurry of hurricanes about a decade ago. So what we now need to deal with is we need a domestic carrier, citizens or otherwise, that will help keep the out-of-state carriers in line. Now, right now, Citizens is highly politicalized. It's controlled by a Republican majority in the legislature and in the governor's office. And if it is malfunctioning, it is malfunctioning through the political interference in what could have been a great domestic insurance company.
I know it's difficult, but your top three fixes that will A, fix it, but more importantly for people watching, will help bring relief to their pocketbooks.
By making sure that you spread the risk, by making sure
getting more people involved in offering insurance.
No, spread the risk within Citizens so that it's insuring some people in Pensacola, some people in Palm Beach.
Can't cherry pick.
But not everywhere. So if you give Citizens the right to be able to move some of their policyholders over to anybody who will take them, then you can share that risk. Now, it should be a decision that Citizens make. It's their clients, as opposed to being cherry-picked by others. So if you want to have a balanced insurance portfolio, you let Citizens take the lead in helping balance their load, so it's spread across the state.
How much do you think realistically you could cut premiums for hurting homeowners?
The best way to cut premiums is to make sure you have resilient infrastructure, to make sure that it's built to last. Then the risk goes down and so does the premium.
Mr. Hager? He said about diametrically opposed views. How are they diametrically opposed? How do you help people's pocketbooks?
First of all, Mr. Gustafson doesn't speak for me, so I'm going to speak for myself at this juncture. Here's the problem with Citizens. I'm a former commissioner of insurance for the state of Iowa and spent 8 years of my life regulating entities like Citizens and the like. The challenge we have with Citizens, Mr. Gustafson is right. Citizens began as a stopgap insurer. The problem is it was politicized along the way by Democrats, by Republicans. Today it's a monster. It has 1.5 million of the 5 million policies outstanding in the state, and it has about $500 billion of exposure. It has money in the bank of about $6 billion. If you do the math on that, that's about $1 in the bank for every $100 of exposure. Here's what you do. You do what Citizens is currently looking at, and that is to shed some of these policies, get these policies off the books, get them with other insurance companies so that when the big storm hits, and it will come, it is coming, we don't know its name or its date, so that when the storm comes, we have insurers that can withstand the force, withstand the risk. We need to downsize Citizens.
I want to talk we've kept bringing up infrastructure, and we have a few remaining moments, and I want to give you each a close. Let's talk infrastructure for a moment. You fully supportive of Rick Scott when he said no to federal money for a Tampa to Orlando rail line? And what is your view? Because implicit in your comments, Mr. Gustafson, are you think we're not doing enough on infrastructure. So very briefly to both of you, what's your overview on what the most important infrastructure projects are that we need in Florida to grow? And you, Mr. Gustafson, to close out that.
You asked me specifically about the Tampa to Orlando track. There was about $2.5 billion of federal monies offered to the state. Rick Scott made the right decision in terms of rejecting that. He did, because the roll-on cost to taxpayers in Florida was an additional $3 billion. In addition, 9 out of 10 of federal transit systems such as this have gross overestimates in terms of their use. We don't believe the federal numbers, and we have good cause. In other words, this particular trackage called for 3 million riders. We have 1/10 the population of Washington, D.C. They have less ridership, so a boondoggle and a mistake, and the governor did exactly the right thing.
Mr. Gustafson, closing comment on your blueprint for infrastructure to move the state forward.
No one high-speed rail system, in this case Tampa to Orlando, is going to make or break it.
Beyond that even.
For the South Florida community. In the South Florida community, we need roads, multimodal systems, we need education facilities and equipment, we need research facilities and equipment. We can grow the economy if that's what we get. The question is the state legislature committed to sorting through how to get it done, or are they going to continue to deal with ultrasound and women's privacy issues? So what I would like to try to do is change the debate from where the current members of the House seem to want to go, which is social issues that are divisive, to the economic issues that make a difference in people's lives.
I'm going to have to end on that comment to give each of you your close. We have a strict 30-second close. And, sir, Mr. Hager, we'll begin with you. 30 seconds, please.
Thanks. You know, Michael, first of all, thank you. I am the candidate that is in the district. I've served the district. This is my 5th election inside the district. I voted to cut taxes. And unlike my opponent, I served in a legislature in which you couldn't take a cup of coffee. My opponent accepted $50,000 shopping trips for his wife from lobbyists to New York City. My opponent accepted Kentucky Derby trips. I have none of that in my record. The House that I serve in is a house of work. The House Mr. Gustafson oversaw was a house of frivolity.
Mr. Gustafson, your closing comments and your response to those charges.
You know, you sort of know when Bill's not telling the truth because his lips are moving. Now, if he was to read you the whole article, he'd know that I'm the person who put into the Constitution that the governor and the president and the speaker could not get together and make a secret deal without the public being present. That any more than 3 members or more who met had to put a public notice out. That was me. Number 2, I disclosed the trips. The reason he can report the trips is because the disclosure laws at the time said disclose them, and the public would decide. Now, today, they are supposedly not taking gifts. They just don't report them,
Finally,
is what
briefly,
happens today.
the argument for your candidacy? Very briefly, Tim.
I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to take the legislature back about 2 decades to a time where we actually were bipartisan. and actually got things done.
We'll have to leave it there. The Democrat, Mr. Gustafson, the Republican, Mr. Hager, we thank you both for taking time to join us for a spirited discussion on To the Point. Coming up next, our roundtable takes on political issues of the week. Stay with us. Now for our roundtable with News Channel 5 political analyst and coordinator of the American Studies program at Lynn University, Robert Watson. Thanks, as always, for being with us. And
Pleasure.
from our news partners at Scripps Treasure Coast newspapers, Jonathan Mattice, who covers politics and the state legislature. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks so much.
Two presidential candidates. First, the incumbent, of course, President Barack Obama. And the Treasure Coast a few weeks ago gets the pizza hug from Scott Van Duzer. And then Mitt Romney there last Sunday in Port St. Lucie at Tradition Square. And a lot of attention, Jonathan, for near roughly 700,000 people on the Treasure Coast, another 1.3 in Palm Beach County. Talk about the impact and the amount of politicking going on there.
This really isn't something that the Treasure Coast has seen a whole lot of, given that we're a smaller area. Combined, we're a large area, but we're not a Palm Beach County, we're not a West Palm Beach, we're not Miami-Dade. But I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that we have a pretty even mix of Republican Democrats, and I think a lot of them are, their votes are pretty much up on the table right now.
You see a lot of undecideds there in this snapshot of the voter along the Treasure Coast?
I think so. I think, you know, it's hard to tell when you're watching these two very polarizing groups that go to the Obama event, go to the Romney event, or go to the Representative Allen West event, or go to the Patrick Murphy event. But I think that we're seeing that this is one of the districts, District 18 specifically, we're talking about, which is Martin, St. Lucie, Northern Palm Beach, that is most up for grabs in the entire country. We're seeing it in the amount of money that's spent here, and we're seeing it in the amount of appearances by big names, the president himself and the presidential candidate on the Republican side himself, Mitt Romney.
We'll talk Wes Murphy in a moment. Robert, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it points to two things. Number one, it points to just how close this race is. You know, if this was not a close race, they wouldn't be going to places like the Treasure Coast. Everything's in play right now. Every vote counts. We know Florida is the most important swing state in the country, and that this is going to be a nail-biter. Both campaigns are looking at it. Secondly, I think Jonathan's right that this, I think the Treasure Coast is not used to this kind of attention. Number one, politically, on a national stage. Number two, it's not used to this kind of fundraising, which we'll get to, the amount of money that's coming in. But number three, it's not used to this kind of hardball politics. You know, that West Murphy race is turning out to be one of the nastiest and most expensive in the country. This is all a bit new for what was, up until just recently, a rather sleepy district politically. You know, the days when Mark Foley went to, you know, just around down the neighborhood and did coffee shops and shook hands and everybody knew Congressman Mark. It's changing the dynamic quite a bit. And I suspect that just the way every Republican that wants to get elected, they have to visit Little Havana and drink the strong coffee. Pretty soon, I think everyone who wants to get the blue-collar vote is going to go get the pizza hug. That's going to become an iconic part of American politics. Got to get the pizza hug and the endorsement.
I want to segue into Wes Murphy, but within that context, the Allen West Patrick Murphy race in District 18 for Congress there, the rookie, so to speak, against the one-term incumbent in Congress, Allen West. Talk about that race, the amount of money pouring in there, and the dynamic of that race as we see it right now. A lot of political ads being poured in there, and this has turned into perhaps more of a race than many people thought going in. Your thoughts, Jonathan?
Sure. I think that we're seeing well over $15 million in this race right now, just in terms of money raised, and well over $10 million spent. A lot of it on Allen West's side, but to his credit, Patrick Murphy, as a Democratic challenger, a 29-year-old accountant from Broward who moved up here for the race, just like West, he has raised a lot of money. Largely on the fact that he's not Allen West, and I think that we're seeing that dynamic play out. In terms of the tone of the race, I think it's gotten increasingly nasty.
Strident.
Very, very nasty in the past few weeks, particularly with the attacks on Murphy's character as a 19-year-old who got arrested outside of a Miami club for drunken disorderly conduct. And then Murphy fires back against West, calling into question his military record.
Sure. And
how's that playing? And for both of you, how's that playing? I hear so much people said the negative ads they've hit tilt. How's that playing on the Treasure Coast and elsewhere?
Great question. That's what I was going to say, is that because the Treasure Coast is not used to this, it's used to the sort of grassroots, old-fashioned retail politics. You see someone at the coffee shop, you know them, you grew up with them, they knew your kids. That's the way the Treasure Coast has been in politics. You have two carpetbaggers on both sides moving into the area and then burning it down with these kind of negative ads. This is as far as you get from the retail handshake politics. This didn't even go negative. It's beyond negative. It long ago left the policy issues alone. Now it's into, you know, you were underage drinking when you were 19. You discharged a gun and were almost thrown out of the military. It's gone into the worst kind of commercials.
Honorable discharge.
That's right. So what you see is their ads, it looks like the campaigns are running basically what the super PACs would only touch. Right. This is how bad this has gotten. I wonder if there's going to be some blowback, because folks in the Treasure Coast, folks I've talked to up there are beginning to say, enough, we're up to here with it. So I wonder at some point when there's not going to be a diminishing return to these ads.
Reminds you how pivotal these congressional races are in the shape of the next Congress and politics in Washington on the national stage as they fight for control and dominance of the political issues there. Want to dig in a little more to those issues that all of them are confronting. Stay with us. A lot of debates coming up next week. We'll talk about that and issues including Medicare when we come back. Welcome back. This coming Friday at 8 p.m. we're presenting the Murphy-West debate here on News Channel 5 and their race for Congress in District 18, the newly formed district. Jonathan, you covered a joint appearance they had last week. It was as vocal as their ads. I might add you'll be one of the panelists helping question them at our debate we're having at our PTV studios. Talk about that joint appearance, and then I want to talk a little bit about the issues with them.
Well, the two candidates didn't even touch the topics that they've ripped each other on most aggressively, which is Murphy's arrest in 2003 as a 19-year-old, and then West's military record, which we've already mentioned. They stuck largely to the middle, or to, you know, skewed a little bit to their respective sides.
Let's talk issues. You have a lot of retirees on the Treasure Coast. There was an assumption when Ryan was picked to run with Romney, Paul Ryan, to run with Romney on the ticket, Medicare would take the state off the table, perhaps, because of the large retiree votes. Not played out that way. What's the sense of traction on the issues with these candidates on the Treasure Coast?
Well, I think that what you see is two very different ways that candidates are arguing that they're going to be the ones that save Medicare. And honestly, I'm not sure which one is picking up more. It's the plan that Paul Ryan has is what Alan West is supporting and what Mitt Romney is supporting, saying that we're going to take everyone who is under 55 and give them a voucher program, or say we can give you something similar to traditional Medicare. What the Democratic side is saying basically is that this program is going to change Medicare fundamentally, and it's going to increase fees on basically the elderly by about $6,000 a year, from what I've been hearing.
And there's dispute over those numbers. How do you see traction on that issue both, and how will it shape these races in the final 4 weeks, Robert, both congressionally and at the presidential level?
If I can, a real quick word on that West-Murphy debate. While the two candidates behaved, the audience didn't. They were throwing out some lethal words and so forth and so on. But what's interesting about it is a couple things. I think initially the concern by Republicans was that with Paul Ryan being on the ticket, given his positions on Medicare and Social Security, calling for Social Security vouchers, some pretty maybe outside the mainstream comments on Medicare, because the district has a lot of seniors. And secondly, this is all the more important because the economy's bad. You have a lot of seniors who are now on fixed income. Social Security is their only source of income, or the far majority of the source of income. Social Security and Medicare have come front and center, and the candidates are talking about it. What's interesting, though, is the Republicans were worried that with Ryan on the ticket, they would be foregoing and giving up Florida. A lot of polls have suggested that it's an even split, if not more seniors are trusting Romney than Obama. This will be one of the key issues on the Treasure Coast, no doubt about it. Sure. And both candidates have this straight party line position, as you correctly noted, with West towing the Republican line and Murphy towing the Democratic line.
Brief few moments, presidential debate next week, #2, then #3 at Lynn University. That's why Robert...
Oh, by the way,
yes, by the way, that huge one at Lynn University.
Thanks for mentioning that, Mike.
Huge, and Robert's been deeply involved in that. Town hall format on the one on the 16th at Hofstra University. Talk about what's at stake there.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a debate and then there's a debate. Town hall debate is a fundamentally different creature from the other style of debate. What we saw in the first debate was both candidates behind a podium. At Lynn, we're going to see
President
them.
Obama and Mitt Romney.
Right, we're going to see Romney and Obama at Lynn University seated around a table like this interview or like a Charlie Rose, Larry King. But a town hall debate changes everything. You have to interact with the audience, which means a couple things. One, Obama tends to interact a little better with people in an audience than Romney does. Secondly, Obama's a little too professorial behind the podium, but less so when he's interacting with the audience. And thirdly, people are saying Obama needs to go on the attack. However, with the studio audience, I think a lot of them could go on the attack both against Obama and against Romney. So it should be an interesting dynamic. Back in 1992 with Bill Clinton and Bush won, that town hall style debate pretty much changed the complexion of that race. So this could be one. Well, of course, the one at Lynn's the most important one.
Of course.
But this could be a very important debate.
And on that note, back in a moment. Now time for our Watch and Wrap Up. Robert?
Well, there's been a lot of coverage saying the first presidential debate in history was in 1960, Kennedy-Nixon. Actually, it wasn't. That was the first general election televised debate. 1948, the eve of the Oregon Republican primary, Dewey and Stassen had a radio debate. 1948, first presidential debate.
As always, great perspective, great history lesson. We look forward to the third and final presidential debate at Lynn. One in the middle at Hofstra. We'll keep you posted. Jonathan, thanks for being a guest.
Thanks
we look
so
forward
much.
to having you back.
Appreciate it.
And thank you, as always, for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send a comment, do so at WPTV.com. Click on the political link. We wish you and yours a great day and a great week.